Hello, listeners, and welcome to the second program in our series, Let's Learn Life Science, which is produced for grade 8 learners and anybody else who has an interest in plants. Today, I am joined by Pavo and Martha in the studio, and we are discussing fertilization in plants. Please get your pen and a notebook ready and make notes as I am going to ask you some questions at the end of the program. At the end of this program, you should be able to define fertilization as the fusion of male and female gametes, describe the fertilization process and seed formation, define seed dispersal as the transfer of seeds away from the parent plant, list the agents of seed dispersal. My name is Anna Yambo. Pavo and Martha, good morning.
Good morning,
Anna.
Dear listeners, without wasting any time, let's kickstart our discussion.
Fertilization in plants is one of the most interesting topics. When I was much younger, I often wondered how the beautiful flowers and fruits we eat daily were produced. Today I know it is because of the process called fertilization that happens when plants, just like other living organisms, reproduce.
That's true, Pavo. And it's not a simple process as most people tend to think. To prepare for this program, I even had to do an in-depth reading to ensure my knowledge about the topic is accurate. How about we first define fertilization?
Fertilization is defined as the fusion of male and female gametes. Gametes are also referred to as sex cells. Pavo, can you perhaps explain this process?
Definitely, Martha. It all starts with a flower. A flower contains the male part called the stamen and the female part called the carpel. Each one plays an important role. The stamen consists of anthers and the filaments. Pollen grains are found inside the anthers, and the carpels consist of stigma, style, and ovary. Ovules are found inside the ovary.
Let me just elaborate on what Pavo said. For fertilization to take place, both female and male parts of the flower are needed, and also the sex cells that are made in these parts. Plants need insects, birds, small mammals, and wind or water to transfer the pollen from one flower to the next flower. This transfer of pollen is brought about when insects, birds, or small mammals visit the flowers in search for food. Pollen grains can stick to their bodies. These pollen grains will eventually end up in the next flower when the animal lands on or brushes against.
Note that fertilization will only be successful if the flowers or plants are from the same species.
That is so true, Martha. Remember that when pollen grain is being transferred to the stigma of the same flower on the same plant, it's called self-pollination. But when the pollen grain is carried to the stigma of another flower on a different plant of the same species, it's called cross-pollination.
Once the pollen grain lands on the stigma of a flower of the same species, it germinates. Chemicals or enzymes that are released by the pollen grains and the stigma causes the pollen grain to germinate. The pollen tube then starts to form and grow downwards towards the ovary. This process is important to bring the male nucleus and the female nucleus of the sex cells close together so that the fusion or fertilization can take place.
Yes, Pavo, but remember that fertilization has not yet taken place. A number of pollen tubes will grow towards the ovary. Each ovule in the ovary can be fertilized by only one male gamete or sex cell. This means that each ovule has to be fertilized by a gamete from a different pollen tube. The ovule has two protective outer layers. The pollen tube grows into the ovule through a small hole in these protective layers. Fertilization occurs when the male gamete fuses with the female gamete to produce a zygote. A zygote is the fused product of a male and a female gamete.
After fertilization, many parts of the flower are no longer needed. The sepals, petals, and stamens dry up and fall off. The ovule develops into a seed. The seed contains the following: the embryo plant, which formed from the zygote, the endosperm, which formed from a second fertilized ovule, and a seed coat, which formed from the protective layers of the ovule.
Yes, and the ovary develops into a fruit.
During seed formation, the wall of the ovary changes. The ovary develops into a fruit that contains the seeds. The function of the fruit is to provide nutrients to the developed seeds. The fruits are eaten by animals, which help to disperse the seeds.
It is mind-blowing to know that the fruits we eat were actually the ovaries, while the seeds in the fruits were the ovals. What happens to the seeds we swallow?
You become part of the dispersal agents in a way, because the seeds pass through your digestive system.
Some seeds even stick to your clothes or to animals' fur. Like we said earlier, seeds are also dispersed by wind. These seeds are small and light to help keep them up in the air. Some seeds are also dispersed by water, while some others explode and shoot out when their pods burst open.
Well said, Martha. We had an insightful discussion indeed. As we round up, I just want to recap on what we've learned. Dear listeners, go back to your notes and let's go through the main points highlighted today. You can confirm if you were able to take note of all the facts mentioned. Today we learned that fertilization is the fusion of male and female gametes. Remember, a flower has stamens and a carpel. The stamen is the male part of the flower and it consists of anthers and filaments, while the carpel is the female part of the flower which consists of the stigma, style, and ovary. When a pollen grain lands on a stigma of a flower of the same species, it germinates. This is triggered by chemicals that are released by the pollen grain and the stigma. A pollen tube starts to form and grow downwards towards the ovary. A number of pollen tubes will grow towards the ovary. Each ovule in the ovary can be fertilized by only one male gamete. This means that each ovule has to be fertilized by a gamete from a different pollen tube. The ovule has two protective outer layers. The pollen tubes grow into the ovule through a small hole in these protective layers. Fertilization occurs when the male gamete fuses with the female gamete to produce a zygote. The seeds contain the embryo plant which formed the zygote, endosperm which is formed from a second fertilized ovule, and a seed coat which is formed from the protective layers of the ovule. The seeds can be dispersed in different ways. The seeds that are swallowed passes through the digestive system. Some seeds even stick to people's clothes or to animals' fur. Seeds are also dispersed by wind. These seeds are small and light to help keep them in the air. Some seeds are also dispersed by water, while some others explode and shoot out when their pods burst open. Pavo and Martha, thank you so much for making time to join us in studio today. To our listeners, here is a question for you. Which part of the flower becomes the seed after fertilization? A. Ovary. B. Ovule. C. Stigma. This program was written by Shiwa Kambata. Until next time, take care.
This program was brought to you by NAMCOL with funding from the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture and the Commonwealth of Learning.